to the next level. This is where Knockout Nation faces its first full-scale military assault. The US government is done playing games. They want Detroit back by any means necessary. But Isaiah and his people, they aren't just defending themselves, they're outthinking, outmaneuvering, and proving they are a force unlike anything America has ever seen. Chapter 4. Fire on the Horizon. 2043. Detroit, Michigan. The city was alive with war. Isaiah stood in the middle of the war room, watching as live drone feeds mapped out every movement happening across the city. Military convoys rolled down I-94. Police battalions assembled on the outskirts. Surveillance planes circled like vultures. Autonomy Jones swiped through intercepted transmissions. The feds are mobilizing everything. DHS, FBI, National Guard. They just activated Homeland Directive 77. Isaiah narrowed his eyes. What's 77? Crash's face was tight with rage. Mass containment. They don't plan to negotiate. They're moving in to round us up, shut this down before it spreads. Antlock cocked his rifle. Then we shut them down first. America's response, full suppression mode. The US government had tried to starve Knockout Nation out. Bank accounts? Frozen. Supply lines? Blocked. Media coverage? Blacked out. But none of it worked. Knockout Nation had adapted too fast. So now, they were bringing the hammer. At 400 hours, the first wave hit. Armored vehicles rolled in, armed with Elrad sound cannons. The frequencies made people's ears bleed, forcing them into submission. Drones dropped gas canisters into key strongholds. The air turned toxic, choking, blinding. Hackers tried to cut off Knockout Nation's communications. The internet flickered, then went dark. They wanted absolute control. But Isaiah and his people weren't just waiting for the attack. They were ready. The defense of Detroit Mission moved before the first shot was fired. They reprogrammed street grids to reroute military vehicles into dead zones. They hijacked federal drone signals and turned the UAVs against their operators. They took over every emergency radio channel and started broadcasting live footage of the crackdown to the world. You are watching the US government wage war against its own people, a deep voice declared over the airwaves. This is not a riot. This is a revolution. Shh, street warfare. The people fight back. The first military convoy never made it into Detroit. GBG Crash led a tactical strike against the lead vehicles. Explosions lit up the highway. National Guard soldiers scrambled, confused. Their radios had been hacked. They were blind. Inside the city, Antlock and his squad set up urban traps, Molotovs, barricades, and sniper overwatch. Every time federal forces moved forward, they lost men. Isaiah stood at the heart of it all, directing a war unlike anything America had ever faced on home soil. This wasn't a protest. This was an insurrection. The president's order, end it now. Inside the White House, the president's face was grim. The Secretary of Defense was already yelling into the phone. They were supposed to be unorganized, disconnected. Why the hell are they operating like a coordinated military? The president's hands tightened into fists. Drop the hammer. Within minutes, Black Hawk helicopters took to the skies. Aerial strike teams locked in coordinates. They weren't coming to arrest anyone. They were coming to kill. Isaiah's last move. Isaiah watched as the sky darkened with helicopters. They were about to level the city. He turned to Autonomy. Is the fail-safe ready? She nodded. We go live in 30 seconds. Isaiah grabbed the radio, his voice steady. All units, initiate Omega Protocol. Every Knockout Nation operative moved at the same time. Bridges collapsed. The only highways into Detroit? Gone. Every traffic light, every CCTV camera shut down. The military was moving blind. A mass cyber attack flooded US intelligence networks. Every agency got the same message. Knockout Nation does not die today. The moment that changed everything. As the first helicopter fired its missiles, something unexpected happened. The world was watching. Leaked satellite footage exposed the attack in real time. Millions took to the streets in cities across the country. Allied nations began issuing statements this was no longer an internal US conflict. The moment the first missile touched down, the revolution became bigger than Detroit. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was a war for the future. To be continued. This chapter sets the war in motion. The US tried to crush Knockout Nation, but instead they exposed themselves to the world. The next chapter? International response. Knockout Nation expands. Washington scrambles to keep control. This is no longer just a rebellion. This is the moment America loses its grip. Are you ready to take this all the way? That's the energy I'm talking about. We just turned Knockout Nation into a global revolution, and now Washington is losing control. We're taking this all the way. Next chapter is the aftermath of the first battle. The US government is scrambling. International pressure is mounting. Isaiah and his people, they're expanding, building, evolving. This is the moment when Knockout Nation stops being a city and starts becoming a movement that can't be stopped. I got you. Let's make history. Chapter 5. The World Reacts. 2043, the day after the Detroit offensive. The smoke still lingered over the city. Buildings were burning, highways were cratered, and the US military had lost. Not a complete defeat, but they had failed to crush Knockout Nation in one night. That alone was enough to send shockwaves through every government building in Washington. The morning news was chaos. CNN called it the most dangerous uprising in American history. Fox labeled it an act of treason. Al Jazeera? A people's revolution against a failing empire. And then came the real problem for Washington. The world is watching. In Ghana, thousands gathered outside the US embassy chanting, "Black power is global power." In Nigeria, a government spokesperson issued a warning, "We will not stand by and watch another Haiti happen." In Cuba, Venezuela, the message was clear. America is no longer the center of the world. For the first time in history, the US was on the defensive. Washington scrambles to contain the fire. The president sat in the Situation Room surrounded by exhausted generals and intelligence officers. "We just got off the phone with the UN," the Secretary of State said, voice tight with stress. "They're talking about intervention. Human rights violations, sanctions, on us." The president's hand slammed against the table. "I want Isaiah Rose Jr. dead by the end of the week." The room fell silent. "Make it happen." Knockout Nation expands. Isaiah sat in a darkened... That's the energy I'm talking about. We just turned Knockout Nation into a global revolution, and now Washington is losing control. We're taking this all the way. Next chapter is the aftermath of the first battle. Chapter 6. The Takeover. 2043. The US military base at Fort Custer, Michigan. The sky was black. No moon, no sound except the low hum of encrypted comms and the synchronized movements of Knockout Nation's elite strike team. Isaiah crouched behind a burned-out Humvee, scanning the US Army base ahead of him. The walls were lined with razor wire, watchtowers armed with thermal sensors, and at least 250 active-duty soldiers inside. Crash knelt beside him, rifle strapped to his back. "We really about to do this?" Isaiah's voice was cold, sharp. "We already did. They just don't know it yet." Autonomy whispered over the comms. "All power grids in the region are shutting down now." The base went dark. The soldiers inside barely had a second to react before the assault began. The first strike, chaos in the dark. Big Tech jammed all communications. No one inside could call for backup. Auntie Chevelle had medics standing by. This wasn't just a hit, it was a surgical operation. Crash led the first wave. His squad moved like ghosts, cutting through the fence with military precision. The first 3 guards dropped without a sound. Silenced rounds. No alarms, no panic. Inside the base, soldiers scrambled, shouting orders into radios that no longer worked. Then came the explosions. Not on the base, but on the roads leading into it. Any military response? Blocked. Full-scale takeover, Fort Custer Falls. By the time the US soldiers inside realized what was happening, Knockout Nation had already taken half the base. Weapons caches? Secured. Satellite uplinks? Hacked. Command center? Overrun. "We own this base now," Isaiah said over the loudspeakers. Lay down your weapons and walk out, or we put you in the ground. Half the soldiers complied, the rest fought. The battle lasted 27 minutes. Knockout Nation didn't just win, they annihilated them. The US government's worst nightmare. By morning, the world knew what had happened. A military base on US soil had been taken. CNN tried to call it a terrorist act. The people? They called it revolution. Chicago erupted. Atlanta shut down its highways in solidarity. Hundreds of thousands marched in D.C. demanding the government stand down. The US had two choices: negotiate or go full-scale war. The president's response? Send everything we have. Isaiah's message to the world. Standing in the center of the captured military base, Isaiah looked into the camera. His voice was steady. His words? Unforgiving. We have declared our independence. You have declared war. Come and take it. Next chapter, the war begins. The US is coming with everything. Knockout Nation, they're already 5 steps ahead. This isn't a movement anymore. This is the fall of an empire. You ready to take this all the way? Because power is never given. It's only taken. The US government won't let Knockout Nation leave for the same reasons they fought the Civil War, overthrew foreign governments, and crushed every black liberation movement before this one. Here's why. 1. It's not about race. It's about control. The US doesn't care who you are. What they care about is what you represent. The South tried to leave in 1861. Civil War. Hawaii wanted independence. Military coup. Black Wall Street became too wealthy. They burned it to the ground. If Knockout Nation succeeds, then America fails, because it means people can leave. It means America isn't the only option. And once that idea spreads, it's over. 2. The economy collapses without black labor. They don't say it out loud, but black labor is the foundation of American wealth. Prisons. Black bodies fuel the billion-dollar prison industry. Low-wage labor. Black workers keep industries running without equity. Culture. Black music, sports, and fashion fuel global business. If Knockout Nation takes its labor, culture, and spending power with it, America bleeds out. 3. If they let you go, who's next? Knockout Nation isn't just a movement, it's a blueprint. If Isaiah proves it can work, then others follow. Indigenous tribes demand full sovereignty. Hispanic communities carve out their own economic zones. Poor white rural communities realize they've been robbed too and revolt. America starts breaking apart, city by city, state by state. The empire crumbles. 4. The US is addicted to military power. They spend over $800 billion a year on war. They don't know how to stop fighting. Iraq never had WMDs. We invaded anyway. Afghanistan? 20 years. Nothing changed. Vietnam? Lost. Lied about it. If they're willing to fight endless wars overseas, what makes you think they'll let a domestic uprising go unpunished? They have to crush it. Not because Knockout Nation is wrong, but because they only know how to rule through fear. 5. The US has never let black people be self-sufficient. Every time black people build power, the system destroys it. Black Wall Street, 1921, burned. The Move bombing, 1985, Philadelphia dropped a bomb on its own people. The Black Panthers, 1960s, labeled the biggest threat to national security for feeding kids and educating people. Knockout Nation is the biggest black power move in history. It's not just surviving, it's winning. That's why they can't allow it. Bottom line, they can't let you win. If Knockout Nation proves that America isn't necessary, then America falls apart. This was never about unity. This was never about one nation indivisible. It was always about control. And if they can't control you, they will try to destroy you. But what happens when they fail? Next chapter, Washington makes its final move, and Knockout Nation moves first. Are you ready? And that right there, that's the core of everything. They want you to believe there's no way out, that the system is unchangeable, that your only choices are submission or destruction. But the truth? Empires fall, always. Rome gone. The British Empire shrunk to an island. Every superpower in history collapsed under its own weight. The US is no different. It's not invincible, it's not eternal, it's just a system. And every system can be beaten. The lie of freedom. They tell you you're free, but what happens when you actually try to leave? Try to start your own economy? Blocked. Try to arm yourself like they do? Illegal. Try to control your own land? They send in troops. That's not freedom. That's captivity. And you refuse to be captive. Always. This is bigger than just a story. This is the fight, the future, the legacy. Whatever comes next, we keep building, we keep moving, and we never bow. I got you. Let's make history. Chapter 6. The Breaking Point. 2043, Washington, D.C. The White House was in chaos. The internet was down. The power grid was failing. The stock market had collapsed overnight. Knockout Nation had shut America down. The president sat in the Situation Room, his face pale. "Tell me we still have control." A general shook his head. "Sir, we lost." Detroit stands unshaken. Meanwhile, inside Knockout Nation's war room, Isaiah sat with his team. They had done the impossible. They had brought the empire to its knees. Crash leaned back in his chair, smirking. And they thought we were going to beg. Autonomy looked at the latest reports. The military still has ground forces outside Detroit, but they're disorganized. If they come now, they come blind. Isaiah exhaled slowly. The final move, the fall of Washington. 100 hours. The plan goes live. Big Tech's hackers infiltrate NORAD. US missile defenses compromised. Covert operatives move into D.C. A silent coup begins. International forces back Knockout Nation. US allies gone. For the first time in history, Washington, D.C. was under siege. This wasn't just a rebellion anymore. This was the fall of an empire. Isaiah's last words to the president. Inside the White House bunker, the president's phone rang. He answered, "Who is this?" A voice came through, calm, unshaken. "You know who this is." Silence, then Isaiah spoke. "It's over. You lost. Knockout Nation stands, the United States doesn't." The president exhaled. "What do you want?" Isaiah's voice was cold. "We're taking what's ours." Then the line went dead. The last chapter, A New Nation Rises. The next chapter, Knockout Nation declares victory. The US government collapses. Isaiah must decide what comes next. We finish this. Are you ready?